Hey everyone, welcome to the UFC 221 breakdown. We're going to be talking about the fights coming up this weekend in Perth, headlined by Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold. Originally, we were supposed to see Robert Whittaker versus Rockhold, but Whittaker sustained an injury. He's off the card, and Yoel stepped in. And if you're an Australian and you bought a ticket there, you're probably pretty disappointed. But this is still a number one versus number two contender matchup, so it should be a hell of a fight. And both of these guys have fought in Strikeforce, and I don't think that they ever fought each other while they were there. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out, because I know like Jacare, Romero, and Rockhold were all in Strikeforce, and I think Jacare and Romero have fought, Rockhold and Jacare have fought, but these two never have. So it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. First off, let's get to some news. First, Max Holloway is out of his scheduled bout against Frankie Edgar, which sucks because it feels like they're never going to get this fight put together. So the question is now, what do you do with Frankie? He sent out like a tweet, I think, or something on social media, and said that he would take anyone, any division, and I mean, obviously he wants to fight, right? Like, he hasn't fought in a while either, so you got to stay active. Might be smarter to take a fight in a different division, though, especially like a guy like Cody Garbrandt says he's willing to step up, because if Frankie takes a fight against the guy who he probably should fight, which is Brian Ortega, and you lose that fight, you lose your chance to fight for the title, because it's going to go to Ortega if he beats a guy like Frankie. And I know Frankie probably doesn't care. He's probably not thinking about that because he thinks he's going to win. But yeah, it might be safer to fight a guy like Cody Garbrandt just because you're fighting him at 135. But if you lose at 135, that looks a little bit worse losing at a weight class down than if you were to lose at a weight class up. You know what I mean? I don't think Frankie's going to fight anyone at 155. The Garbrandt and Frankie fight's very interesting because Frankie has like clean boxing, but his boxing isn't going to be on the level that Cody's is. I wouldn't imagine, at least. So you get to see if a guy like Frankie can take Cody down. And Cody's a guy who relies on finishing people, and Frankie's never been finished in his career. So it'd be interesting to see with someone with as heavy as hands as Garbrandt has can pull this off finally. I think the fight, in fairness to the division, and especially with the chaos that you got going on, 185 is starting to work itself back out, but I mean, with all the interim belts and stuff they're handing out, you should do Frankie versus Ortega. And like I said, with how many interim belts you have floating around right now, just let this be for the interim belt if that's what you want to do, because the UFC isn't going to want to have a fight where they don't have a title fight as the headliner. So that's going to be a problem. So if you slap an interim belt on, at least you get to wrap a belt around someone's waist at the end of the night. I don't agree with it. I think it dilutes the actual championship. But, I mean, it is what it is, I guess. So yeah, as a fan, and in fairness to both of the top contenders in that division, which I think are Frankie and Ortega, they should fight and work it out. And the winner of that should fight Max when he's healthy. I don't know. We'll see, though. I'm sure the UFC is going to make a decision based on how much revenue they think they can bring in. And to be honest, Frankie versus Cody is probably a bigger fight. So I don't know if that'll actually go through, but that's a fight that, if I was the UFC, I think would sell more pay-per-views with those two as the headliner. Next, oh yeah, we need to talk about Valentina Shevchenko's win over the weekend, and who do we lay blame on in that situation? Is it the matchmaker who put that fight together, the commission who allowed it to happen, or is it Yamasaki for not stopping the fight? And I think it's all three. I think everyone's to blame a little bit there. And Dana White kind of made a good point when he said that this is a new division, and it's fights like this are gonna happen until you work out who's gonna win. But in this situation in particular, you had a person who had fought Amanda Nunes, Holly Holm. Like, she's fought the top tier at a weight division above 125. Like, she's fought the top girls at 135 and competed really, like, she fought a really competitive fight against Amanda Nunes, who's the current champion up there. And you're going to throw her a girl, I mean, undefeated or not, her UFC debut is going to be Valentina Shevchenko. That's a joke. That fight should never happen. And Yamasaki's got to be at fault too, though, because you have to stop that. I mean, that was a beating, and you got to worry about the fighter's health and that. And I mean, props to, what's her name? I can't remember her name. I can't remember it, but props to her for showing immense toughness and heart in that fight. But man, the ref has to do his job there, and Yamasaki's been having some slip-ups as of late, so it'll be interesting to see if commissions and whoever decides who puts the judges in place, give him another opportunity to get in the octagon. Next, let's talk about CM Punk fighting at UFC 225. He says he's going to, and let's just throw this in there because both of them are silly. Floyd Mayweather fighting in the octagon. Both of these fights are, the fact that there's potential for both of these guys to fight. I mean, CM Punk already has fought in the octagon, and it's kind of disrespectful to the sport, to the people who go through and earn their way up. And you got a guy, like, I'll give you a perfect example. Ben Askren is probably the best fighter who never fought in the UFC. Throw your Fedor argument in there. Ripping through everyone, never lost. And he never gets a shot. Like, he never gets into the UFC. Things fall apart. Negotiations go all over the place. And then you get a guy like CM Punk who gets in, no mixed martial arts experience, and gets a spot on the UFC roster strictly based off of star power. I mean, it's insane. And he got ragdolled by Mickey Gall, who's good, but he's not like upper echelon. You know what I mean? Like, that's going to happen to everyone that CM Punk fights, in my opinion. I mean, unless he made some rapid, like, BJ Penn getting his black belt type of progression. There's no reason for him to be fighting in the UFC. Let him work his way up through these lower organizations. It's ridiculous. And people are going to buy it, though. That's the thing. Like, Dana White knows that. Dana White and the UFC brass know that people are going to tune in just to watch CM Punk get his ass beat. Oh, man. It's frustrating, though, because you have these young up-and-coming people who are trying to get in, like, trying to break their way through. And you got guys like CM Punk who just land on the roster because he was good in WWE. It's ridiculous. And then Floyd fighting in the octagon is insane too. I don't think he's ever going to do it. There's no way. I mean, we've already seen this play out, right? Like when Conor went to boxing, Conor got outclassed. And it's insane that we're going to bring Floyd in just to try to like sell a pay-per-view and watch him get demolished in this. Because even if Floyd were to start off a fight and tag the person and drop them, it's not like boxing where you get like a 10 count and you get to go back to your feet. Floyd then has to get on top of them to finish the fight, or they're going to recover and come back. Like, the only way Floyd's going to win is by a clean knockout, like a one-punch knockout where he doesn't have to get on top of the person and finish. Because even if he knocks someone down, like I said, he's going to have to go to the ground, and there is no way that he can make the amount of progress that he needs to make. Give him 3 years, and he's still not going to be at the level at, like, maybe by then, if he had some real jiu-jitsu experience under him and some real, like, tests in the gym dealing with leg kicks and stuff, and maybe you get the grappling going, like, maybe then you can give him a low-tier UFC fighter. I still don't like his chances then. But especially because of his age. If he was, like, 20, even anywhere in his 20s, I'd be more confident with saying, like, yeah, he might be able to get into the UFC then. But then you got to fight, like, a low-level guy. If you throw Floyd in on a fight against like Conor McGregor, who is a world-class talent, like, love him or hate him, he is, he's going to get dominated because Conor's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Like, I know he doesn't get a lot of credit for that because his striking is so outstanding, but he swept Nate Diaz when they fought. Like, people forget that, and he's going to be so much more advanced than Floyd in every area. And the distance is different too. Like, Conor's going to be standing farther away from him, kicking him in the body, kicking him in the head. Oh man, it's just silly to me that they're still considering stuff like this. Like, we saw Conor go into boxing. Like, that was silly enough, right? Like, it was a spectacle. I wanted to see it, but we saw it, and that same result is probably going to happen to every UFC fighter that tries to box, right? I don't know. Rather see guys fight who deserve to fight in the UFC. And it was also a little bit different on the flip side, right? Like for boxing, boxing has a lot of trouble. So a fight like this brings a lot of revenue in. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made up at the top when you're boxing, but like that sport is struggling right now, and the judging and everything in that is horrendous. Like if you watch the Triple G and Canelo fight, oh man, they're just what a mess over there. So doing a fight like Conor and Floyd kind of makes sense because like I said, it's a spectacle, and you get to see a boxer beat up on a guy who practices MMA, and it kind of like restores some faith in the boxing community. Like, okay, our sport is still legit. Like when we do this, because if Conor would have came in with an MMA background and won that fight, it would have been really bad for boxing, because you'd be like, well, how the fuck is some guy who fights in the UFC coming in and beating one of the best defensive boxers ever? So I think that validation in the fact that like the UFC is not as good as boxing in that regard, right? Like a UFC fighter is never going to come into a boxing match and be a better boxer than a professional boxer. Anyway, let's quit talking about nonsense and get on to the actual fights coming up this weekend. First up on the main card, we're going to have Tyson Pedro, who's an Australian native. His dad, John Pedro, I believe is his name, did a lot for MMA in Australia. But he's going to be fighting Saparbek Safarov, and he's on he just lost his last fight. He got knocked out in the second round, but before that he had won 2 in a row, and he's only got 1 fight in the UFC, and that was his most recent one, and that was in December of 2016. So it's been a while since he's fought. It's been a little over a year since he's fought, and he lost to Jean Valanche, which, I mean, that's at the time Valanche was ranked number 14. So that's a tough fight to come in on your UFC debut and try to win. And Safarov, I mean, he throws some wild punches, man. And Valanche is kind of a brawler too. Like, I don't want to call his striking clumsy, but it's not as crisp as it could be. And Valanche looked very technically sound against a guy like Safarov. And Pedro, he's coming off a loss as well. He lost to Alito Latifi, which Latifi's good, man. He's got a really good wrestling background, and when he gets on top of you, he really makes you wear his weight. He also had a lot of UFC experience, and I think that would have been Pedro's 3rd fight in the UFC. But before he fought Latifi, and one more thing that I want to mention in the Latifi fight that impressed me is Pedro was clearly exhausted in the 3rd round, and always trying to get back to his feet and moving his hips and switching them and trying to dig the underhook and half guard. Like, he was constantly moving even in the 3rd round. And a lot of the times you'll see people go to the ground and rest, especially at this weight class. This is a light heavyweight fight. And when you start getting into those 3rd rounds, you get tired. I like to see movement off your back. To me, it tells me that you're still pushing to win. And he was outclassed in that fight, but that's like a championship mentality. And Pedro has a lot of potential. He's really good on the ground. He's finished a ton of fights via submission. He's got some KOs mixed in there. He just knocked out Paul Craig 2 fights ago, right before his Latifi fight. Both those guys were unbeaten at the time. And the difference in that fight was Pedro's ability to land a big right hand, because Paul Craig, very good grappler, and they had some pretty back and forth exchanges going on. And man, when Pedro landed, that ended up being the difference maker. And that happens when you start getting heavier, right? Like, the ability to land that one shot sometimes can change the outcome of the whole entire fight, because you got so much power in your hands. And then before that, he fought Khalil Roundtree, and I think this was his UFC debut. Could be wrong. Anyway, he got knocked down by Roundtree early in the 1st round. But then he lands a takedown, advances to mount, and taps him out via rear naked choke in the 1st round. And Roundtree's, I mean, pretty good. Like, that's an impressive UFC debut win. If I have that messed up, let me know. I think that's his UFC debut, though. I like Pedro a lot in this fight, because I think that, like Safarov, he relies a lot on brawling and throwing some wild punches, and I'd expect to see Pedro come in, land a clean jab or something, and then push him up against the fence. Land a takedown and just kind of outwork him on the ground. Good. This is a really good fight card. I know there's not a lot of big names on this, but if you look at the matchups, they're all extremely interesting. I'm leaning pretty Australian heavy on the entire card. I'm taking Pedro in this fight. Like I said, I think you're. The other thing that worries me with Safarov is he's easy to hit, so you don't have to be like an expert striker to land on this guy. And I think that's going to let Pedro mix things up. I think he's just going to be a little bit too overwhelming for Safarov. We'll see if Safarov wins. He's got to land, and he's got to. I think you got to calm down in this fight. Like don't get into those brawly exchanges. Kind of look to land your shots because he throws a lot of overhands, and if he connects with one of those, he can do some damage. So be patient, wait for your openings. Don't overextend on anything that's gonna let you get taken down. So key to victory for this fight for me is for Safarov, don't get taken down. Like that should be their main focus in camp coming into this fight. Next we got Jake Matthews versus Li Jinglong. Jake Matthews is an Australian as well. He last fought Bojan Vlichkovic. I'm going to mess these names up. I always mess the foreign names up. Win via split decision in a really good fight that saw a lot of interesting transitions on the ground. He tried to drag the fight to the ground in the first. You could tell that both. And then when he did get Vlichkovic down, both back and forth the whole time, very evenly contested. It'd be hard to pick a winner in this fight. Like I said, he gave up his back late in the third round, but ended up I think he got back to his feet. Man, to me, I'm looking at all these cards on here. The next two are going to be in the heavyweight division, so I'd expect a knockout there. But as far as potential for fight of the night goes, I think this is your fight. Because before Jake Matthews won the split decision, he lost a split decision to Andrew Holbrook and lost to Kevin Lee via first round TKO. So I know he's got a win in his back pocket, but he's going to be looking to he's going to have a fire lit under his ass because he's not in a must-win situation, but if he wants to start climbing up the ranks, and he's moved up to welterweight, he started off at 155, if he wants to start climbing the ranks, he needs to have an impressive outing here. And Li Jinglong, the Leech, is coming off of, I think he's on a 4-fight win streak right now, and his most recent one was against Zach Otto, and he knocked him out in the first round. The Leech has a lot of power in his hands, and he moves well, and he's got good head movement. He does get tagged, though. He got tagged when he fought Frank Camacho, and he got tagged in the fight before that when he fought Bobby Nash, who's a wrestler. And that kind of led to Bobby Nash's success in the grappling exchanges because Bobby Nash was a state champion in high school, wrestled at Michigan State, and before he landed a shot that hurt Lee, Lee was doing really well defending the takedowns, and he has a really strong sprawl. I know that he wrestled in China, but I don't know much about wrestling credentials over there. You know what I mean? Is the wrestling over there equivalent to D1 wrestling at a place like Oklahoma State or Penn State or, you know what I mean, any one of those big schools like that? But he did look good against a guy with a very credentialed wrestling background. So I think that's going to present some problems for Matthews. Unless Matthews can start getting some combos together. You got to string some combos together to beat this guy. The problem is Lee is very good on his feet. And really, he's got a really tough chin, too. You can crack him, and he just kind of walks through it. And the key for Matthews might be to land one of those shots and get him against the fence and start working the takedowns that way. Don't let him get his hips under him when he's sprawling and stuff. Because in the middle of the octagon, he was doing very well against a high-level wrestler. I would look for Matthews to try to take this fight to the ground, and I'd look for Lee to try to stay standing. I'm taking Matthews in this fight, but this fight could go either way. I'm taking Matthews just because it's in Australia, and I think that his urgency to win might be a little bit more than Lee, who is on a 4-fight win streak. Gonna have the home crowd behind him. like I said, look for him to try to land a shot, maybe push things up against the fence, and then try to land a takedown and smother him on top for 3 rounds. Because I don't think standing there with the guy who has the power that Lee has is a good idea. And for Lee, keep it on the feet. Don't go to the ground and get in these exchanges with him, because Matthews has incredible transitions on the ground. Like, if you want to see a back and forth ground fight, go back and watch his last one against Vilchkovic. Yeah, I'm taking Matthews just because he's at home. I like the fact that he has a home crowd behind him. I think it'll light a fire under him, and we'll see an impressive outing from Matthews. But like I said, I expect this to be the fight of the night. Like, looking at every fight on the card, I think that's your most likely candidate. And next, we got Tai Tuivasa versus Cyril Asker. And Tuivasa has won 8 fights, I think, in a row. 6 or 8. And every single fight has been a first-round knockout, including his UFC debut against Rockhold. So, really heavy-handed. Like I said, never had a fight leave the first round. He's a specimen, man. He's a big guy, and he's fighting Cyril Asker, who just picked up a win via rear naked choke at UFC Fight Night. And who's the headliner on that card? I don't know. I don't know exactly what fight night it was. I just have the date here, November 25th, 2017. So a lot of these guys are coming on that are fighting on this card are also fought in like November to December range. I would expect Asker has a wrestling background a little bit, and I would expect him to try to take this fight to the ground. But if you watch Tuivasa's fight against Coulter, his ability to get back to his feet is very impressive. So I expect Asker to get him down maybe once or twice, but I don't expect Asker to do to Tuivasa what he did to Yao Zhang Hu. I think Asker will land a couple takedowns, and then Tuivasa will just work his way back to the feet, and it'll be first or second round knockout. You might see Asker way on top of him for a little bit in that first round, but I think he's going to use a lot of energy getting there. This fight might lead the first, it might not. I don't know. It'll depend on Asker, I think. I think if they're standing, Tuivasa is going to have the advantage there. You never know at heavyweight, though, right? Like, they're both so heavy-handed. One punch can change the outcome of the fight, but I just think Tuivasa is going to be a little bit too overwhelming for him. For Asker, like I said, the key to beating a guy like Tuivasa, though, is you're going to have to take him down and hold him there and maybe make him get into some deep water in the second and third round. If he can start doing that, you might see Asker start to have some success. Like I said, if Asker wants to win this fight, I think the key is going to be rely on your wrestling and wear this guy out. Like, don't let him... You have to get him out of the first round where he's been most dangerous so far in his career. If you can do that, I think you can have some success. Like I said, I expect Tuivasa to just I think Asker will land the takedown, but then when Tuivasa gets up, Asker will be like, fuck, he did that pretty easily. And then that'll kind of hurt his confidence going on into the later rounds. But we'll see. And then you have Mark Hunt versus Curtis Blades. Mark Hunt's ranked number 5 right now, and Blades is number 9. So Blades' last fight was against Alexei Oleinik. He knocked him out in the second round. I think something funky happened with that, right? That was at UFC 217. I can't remember exactly what it was. I just remember it had a weird ending. Like a little bit of controversy there. Anyway, before that, he has a unanimous decision win over Omi Lanechek. And then he has a win over Adam Millstreet via second-round TKO. But that got overturned to a no contest because he tested positive for marijuana, which was bullshit because it's not a performance-enhancing drug. But it is what it is. We got a no contest on there. So really, Blades, he's 9-1. He's only lost 1 fight, and that was to Francis Ngannou, which was a doctor stoppage. He's got a really strong wrestling background, and expect him to try to use that early against a guy with as heavy hands as Mark Hunt has. Mark Hunt's famous for just like throwing uppercuts and walking away as the guy falls, right? Like, he knows when he hits you that you're going out. He's a K1 Grand Prix kickboxing champion. Granted, that was like 01, so like 17 years ago is when he won that. And he's old, right? Like, that's a concern, and he's been saying stuff in the media like, oh, like he's not sure, like he's having trouble remembering things or something, and then he got pulled from the fight because he's saying ridiculous things like that. Like obviously you can't, if you're trying to put the fighter's health first, you can't let him fight when he's saying that. So you got to wonder what's going on with him right now. But Mark Hunt, over his last 3 fights, he just most recently knocked out Derek Lewis in the 4th round. Lost to Overeem via KO, and then lost to Brock Lesnar via unanimous decision. And that got overturned to no contest because Lesnar got caught for taking some type of steroid. I don't know what it was. I don't know the name of it or anything. But then before that, he knocked out Frank Mir and Antonio Silva. So, I mean, obviously, like I said before, at heavyweight, both of these guys are going to have knockout power. I expect the difference to be whether or not Blades can start mixing in some takedowns. And this is only a 3-round fight. So, if you can do that, if you can, like, way on top of Hunt will just probably keep marching you down no matter how tired he gets, right? Like, even if the punches are lazy, they're still going to have immense power on them. So Blades is going to be have to be on top of his game the whole fight. Man, this is a tough fight to pick because you could see either of these guys winning because Hunt obviously has the edge and experience. I mean, not only in MMA, but his whole kickboxing career. You have to take that into account. But then the fact that he's getting old, like the head trauma. I like Blades in this fight. I think you'll see a speed difference a little bit. I think Blades will be faster. I think he'll have some success getting the fight to the ground and getting some ground and pound going. Blades also moves really well for a big guy, so look out for that. Yeah, I think his safest route is still to take him down. Like I'm still not sure, even if you do move well, that you want to get in a striking exchange with Mark Hunt. I'm sure Mark Hunt is going to be hunting for the knockout, so you got to be wary of that at all times. I like Blades. Like I said, I think I'm going to take him. This is a close fight, though. I could see it going either way. Like, if Blades can't start mixing in takedowns, look for him to struggle against Hunt. Look for him to start getting some combinations landed on him and getting into some trouble. Or, I mean, depending on how much Blades has improved, maybe he'll come out and put on a striking clinic. Like, maybe he's really been working that for this fight. It's going to be interesting to see how this one plays out. Because this is a big fight for Blades, too, because he's gonna start moving up the ranks a little bit. Like he's in the top 10, and he's fighting a guy in the top 5, so this might propel him into those upper echelon guys. Start fighting guys like Fabricio Verdum and the Ngannous and not Stipe yet, but the Junior Dos Santos, those type of characters. I don't know what round. Maybe. I don't think this fight is going to go the distance either way. I'm not even going to give a prediction on it. It's impossible to act like you know what's going to happen in any fight, and then when heavyweights start throwing their hands around, it's why the belt changes hands so often, right? That's why it's so impressive that Stipe has defended it 3 times in a row because, I mean, goddamn, they just pack so much power. And then moving on to the headliner. Like I said, this was originally supposed to be Rockhold and Whitaker, but now Whitaker's fallen off with an injury, so Yoel Romero stepped in. So now you got the number 1 and number 2 contender fighting for the interim belt. And there's so many. Why do you need an interim belt right here? You know, I guess, like we were talking about earlier, if you strap an interim belt on Frankie and Ortega, you can say you got a title fight as your headliner. That's probably what they're doing here. Because you don't need interim belt to know that the winner of this fight is probably going to rematch Whitaker. I know he already has a win over Yoel Romero, but that's a fight that you could make again. Anyway, enough bitching about the interim titles. The fight's going to happen is the point. And Romero, just as I just mentioned, lost most recently to Robert Whitaker. Before that, he had a flying knee knockout win over Chris Weidman and a split decision win over Jacare. And I guess that fight probably came down to how you scored the second round, because Romero had a lot of success early in the first. Second round was iffy, and then Jacare looked good in the third. So I honestly don't know who you give that fight to. It was very closely contested. Got a really strong wrestling background. I think he's won a world championship 5 times. Beat Cael Sanderson twice. So very, very explosive and a very impressive wrestler. Problem with Yoel Romero is he does start to fade a little bit as fights wear on in the later rounds. I don't know how much of an issue that's going to be this time. Like, I expect it to be a problem against a guy like Rockhold, who kind of did the opposite against Weidman, right? Like, as that fight wore on, Luke looked like he was gaining momentum. And Luke's so high. Like, I know that Luke has incredible kicks, and he's so high level that he's not going to be afraid to throw him against Romero. Like, I'm not saying he's just going to throw him out there willy-nilly, but he's not. He's going to implement his kicks. And I think that for Rockhold, that's probably going to be the key to the fight, at least early. Like, you have to keep Romero at bay and maybe start beating up those legs because he is extremely explosive. Like, look for Rockhold to throw some leg kicks out there and really get his kicks working early. And then as the fight wears on and Romero starts getting tired, look for Rockhold to start taking over. And if I know that Romero has a really good wrestling background, like an incredible wrestling background. Maybe it's one of the best on the UFC roster. But when Rockhold gets on top of people, they don't get up. Look at what he did to Weidman. He has a smothering top game, and he doesn't give you a whole lot of room for error. The problem with Rockhold, his biggest problem, is kind of arrogance, right? Like, he drops his hands, and if you saw, he most recently fought David Branch, right? I mean, granted, he beat him via, I think Branch tapped out to strikes, I think. Anyway, really beat up on Branch, but when Branch was finding success, it was because Rockhold was like dropping his hands. I don't understand why he does it. I don't know if it's just like an arrogance thing or an ego. I don't know, because he did it against Bisping, and look what happened. Like, Rockhold was throwing the combos out there and then just dropping his hands down here, and he paid for it. But before the Bisping fight, like I said, he had a win over Chris Weidman, where he looked strong going into he knocked him out in the 4th round, and that was the fight that could have been stopped in the 3rd. So I would expect this fight to be very close, like pretty closely contested on the feet. Maybe you might see Rockhold get taken down earlier in the fight, and then as the fight wears on, I think Romero is going to really start to gas out, because I don't think that Romero will finish Rockhold within the first 2 rounds. And even if Rockhold does get taken down, I think he's going to deal those leg kicks out, and it's going to really wear on Romero as the fight starts to go on. Like I said, these guys are both from Strikeforce, and I don't think they've ever fought before, so it's going to be interesting to see who comes out on top here. I like Rockhold a lot. I'm going to get shit for this. I think Rockhold is the best 185er that I've ever seen fight. I know that he obviously doesn't have the credentials that Silva does, but just the things that he can do are, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. And like I said, his losses and his like slip-ups in the octagon come due to arrogance. Like him dropping his hands, getting caught by Bisping. Well, I don't know that he dropped his hands against Vitor, but Vitor was also on TRT, and might be the scariest person that's ever fought in the UFC when he was taking that shit. Just shredded, moving at 100 miles an hour. So that's not a fight that I hold against Rock Vitor on if he could have kept taking TRT. And when you saw him quit taking it, look at the kind of, hasn't been like a terrible fall off, but I mean, he's been struggling lately. He's been struggling to look competitive. He's probably done soon. He's also getting old. Like, how much of that is causing his losses? You know what I mean? Probably a combination of both, right? Probably a combination of the fact that you were used to taking TRT and now you're coming off it and you're getting old at the same time. Like, both of those things are just starting to catch up to you. Anyway, yeah, I'm taking Rockhold. I think you'll see a unanimous decision win from Rockhold, or you'll see him win in probably like the 4th round, kind of similar to what he did to Weidman. Like I said, look for Romero to get tired, and Romero might have to finish this fight early if he wants to win, which he's capable of doing. I mean, he's explosive. Kind of dirty though, right? Like, there's always some controversy surrounding him. Like when he fought Tim Kennedy and got rocked. Like in a fight that if you can't continue when that bell rings, the fight should be over, in my opinion. But took extra time to recover, then came back and beat Tim Kennedy. And then I think in the Jacare fight, he was dumping water all over himself. It's like, just does little things like that. So it'll be interesting to see if he tries to pull something like that off in this fight too. Really good fight card. Like I said, not a lot of big names. This card probably isn't going to be that big of a pay-per-view hit, but if you're a fan of just watching good fights, I'd expect to see a lot of finishes this weekend. I mean, I think Pedro will end in a finish. Matthews and Jing Long that's going to be a really competitive fight because I think those two are both pretty evenly matched. So I think that fight has your best chance of going the distance. I think Tuivasa's fight against Cyril Asker is going to end in, unless Asker wins, he might grind out a unanimous decision, but I think that fight will probably end in knockout, especially if the win comes on Tuivasa's side. I don't expect Blades and Hunt to go the distance, and I do not expect Romero and Rockhold to go the distance. You might see 5 finishes on this card. I'd say at least 3 would be a pretty safe bet. Pretty confident in 4. And like I said, that Jake Matthews fight, that's a tough fight to say is going to go the whole way. Or get finished, I'm sorry. I think that fight has a lot of potential to go the whole way because you're going to see a lot of game plan changes are going to happen in that fight too, I think. Like a lot of adjustments are going to need to be made for both of those guys to be successful, like on both ends. Very good fight card. Didn't talk too much about the fights this past weekend because it was Super Bowl weekend. I didn't really get to watch them. I had some friends done and stuff, but I was probably a little bit too harsh on Eric Anders when I said that we should probably stop considering him. We should probably slow all the hype around him down if he loses to Machida because he didn't look terrible, and Machida's got a lot of experience. And to me, Anders looked really starstruck during that fight. Like he was afraid to throw things or something. So I might have been a little bit too harsh on him. Dodson and Munoz got rescheduled for a later fight, either 222 or 223. So I know they fell off the card, but we'll get to see them fight later. And I think we hit everything I want to talk about. Let's recap the card real quick. In the first bout, I'm taking Tyson Pedro over Safarov. I got Jake Matthews over Li Jinglong. I'm going to say unanimous decision or split decision win for him. I think Tuivasa is going to knock out Asker in the first or second round. Look for Blades to win. I'm really not sure. This is an unpredictable fight because you got Mark Hunt in there, like a crafty vet against a young up-and-coming guy like Blades they can both end the fight at any time. I don't know. Look for Blades to start mixing in some takedowns, and if you can get him right. But I'd look for that to be his game plan. Oh man, I'm gonna stick with my guns. I'm gonna stick with Blades on this one. And then Rockhold over Romero. I think Rockhold I don't think he might catch him with something big, but I would expect him to kind of wear on Romero a little bit and take away some of that explosive power in his legs in the first couple rounds and come out with I think it'll look very similar to what the Weidman fight looked like in the third and fourth round. I'd expect him to get on top of Romero, and Romero's going to have a very tough time getting Rockhold off of him. I think that wraps it up, guys. We'll do a recap of this sometime next week, and we'll catch you later. Thank you for listening.